Here we go. Hey, y'all. Happy December. It is December 9th here in North Carolina. My name is Whitney. I am a GMAT, GRE, and EA instructor. And so I'm excited to be here for this Manhattan Prep for You Prep Hour. I am continuing a sequence that I started a few months ago. Last month, I taught the second part of it. We'll be working on critical reasoning. Yeah, so excited that you're here. For those of you here live, amazing. If you're watching us on YouTube, fantastic. Make sure you subscribe and follow the channel. And if you ever want to be part of the audience that attends these lives, head over to manhattanprep.com and you can sign up for these sessions for free. Yeah. All right. Well, let's do it. So this evening, we're talking a little bit more about the world of critical reasoning. So before now, what we've looked at is kind of the big picture structure of critical reasoning. We've looked in at the inference, draw conclusion questions. Last time we looked at boldface. And this time we'll be taking a look at discrepancy, sometimes referred to as surprise or paradox. And so we'll do a quick process review for like what is critical reasoning, where does it show up in the exam, what's the like basic process, but then we're going to jump really quickly into this focus on critical reasoning discrepancy. If you're checking out this video on YouTube, there should be a link for the first of these sessions, but we're on installment number 3. You don't necessarily have to have done those before for this one to make sense, but it's there for you if you'd like. After we kind of dig in on like what is a discrepancy, how do we make sense of discrepancies and so on, we will then jump in to some official questions, or some full questions, I should say. We'll be working on all Manhattan Prep material this evening. But once we've kind of focused in on a few questions, we'll look at some of the variations that turn up on discrepancy. And these are the accept questions and our fill in the blank questions. And so first question for y'all, when you hear the word discrepancy, what comes to mind? For my folks in the room, what's a discrepancy or a paradox? What might you think of? So like an inconsistency, a difference. Okay, something that's either like wrong, or I love this word incongruous, like it's incongruous, or I mean, again, inconsistent. These are both great words for this concept of a discrepancy. So the idea, and so the idea of this discrepancy is, at least the way I like to think of discrepancies, is we're going to get some information, right? We're going to be told something up front, and it might not, it's going to lead us to believe that one thing would happen, but it turns out that something in opposition to that is what actually happened. And our job is going to be to explain that thing, right? Try to explain what that thing is. Now, before we get fully into one of these discrepancy problems, let's sort of step back. Let's take a look, and I can pull up for you a couple of just kind of big picture understanding of how discrepancy works on the test. So the way we'll deal with critical reasoning, right, as part of the GMAT, critical reasoning is part of the verbal section. So the verbal section of the GMAT consists of 2 question types: critical reasoning, which is the one that we're focusing in on this evening, and reading comprehension. Now, I've said this in all of the previous lessons, but I think it honestly bears repeating. And so what I like to think about these 2 things is this idea that critical reading comprehension's job is to help us, or it's testing whether we're good researchers, right? And so what I mean by that is, are we good at reading material, dense material in most cases, and then reporting back, like we're going to be asked a specific question about the dense material, reporting back without editorializing, without putting our own spin or belief on it, without reaching for information that maybe wasn't brought up, but we think, oh, okay, that seems like that could also be likely. Again, it's how can I report back on the facts? In some ways, it's like out getting myself sued, right? Like, how can I report back honestly? I'm just the facts. That's the opposite of critical reasoning. So, reading comprehension is this idea that I'm going to read a passage and the answers to all of my questions will come directly from that passage. In the world of critical reasoning, that's actually not always the case. In most critical reasoning questions, the answers bring in new information to help explain something or analyze or assess. So we're asked for things, and now we're really getting into these now. This is the first of the question types that we've seen in this series. It's going to start bringing in new information. But we are going to be asked, hey, here's this argument. Something in it seems very like not like it doesn't seem to jive, right? The fact that A is true and B is true, but they don't get along, we don't understand why they don't. Can you come up with some reason? Can you find in the answer choices some reason why these two seemingly opposing things are true at the same time? You might also be told, like, hey, here's this argument. Can you find an answer choice that would actually strengthen this answer choice? So strengthen this argument. So we're going to go outside of the argument and bring in something new. Same thing if we were asked to weaken it, or if we were asked to evaluate, like, you're the person reading this argument. What do you want to know more about? Or if you're trying to find an assumption, that's going to be something that the author didn't say. So we're going to get into those question types eventually. But this is the first of the new information question types in critical reasoning, where we're going to expect that the answer choices are going to introduce new information to help us better analyze or understand the material in a different or more in-depth way. Yeah, so reading comp, everything we need is on the screen. Our job is, can we research without kind of going out there on our own? Critical reasoning is, okay, here's this argument. Can we go out into the world or into the answer choices and figure out what new piece of information might be needed to bring in to accomplish a specific goal? Yeah. Now, we've got a 4-step process for the critical reasoning family of questions. And so we're going to kind of do this through a bunch of questions. We're going to go through a bunch in practice. And so first thing we're going to do is identify the question. So to give you a picture of what a critical reasoning would look like, generally speaking, a critical reasoning question is going to start with an argument at the top. So it'll be like a paragraph. Then you'll be asked a single question. Generally, it comes second. We'll see an example where it doesn't, but generally it comes second. And then you'll have 5 answer choices. So step 1 of our 4-step process says go straight to the question itself. Not read the passage, not go to the answer choices, but go straight in to the question itself. Yeah. So I want to give you some examples of the critical reasoning discrepancy question type. So take a moment and read through some of these. And I want your impression. What do you notice about the language? What's really common in this language? What are some words that you want to be looking out for? Yep, I love if true, right? Super common in all of these. This, like, which of the following, if true? That's a signal that we're going to have to bring something new in and believe it. I love it. Anything else? Okay, we've got this language of explain. That's going to be the most common thing we'll see, is this language that says explain, right? Which of the following can explain? Explain a paradox, explain a surprising finding, or provide an explanation, right? So I want you to notice that for this question type, right, I've pulled a variety of different questions from a mix of explain discrepancies. In this question type, the question itself is actually kind of standardized in a way that for some like makes this actually a little easier than some of the other question types. Some of the other question types can be a lot harder to interpret. And so, or there can be a variety in the wording that can make them a little more difficult. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is we're going to start with a really oversimplified model. Like we're going to look at an example question to go through the remaining 3 steps of our process. We're going to go through an exceedingly simple example that is far more simplistic than anything the real test would give you. But what we want is to kind of get the process as well as understanding what it means when the GMAT says paradox and like what are some of the common trap answers in this space. Yeah. Okay. So step 1, as I mentioned, our step 1 is to identify the question. Go there first, because if I'm being asked to explain a surprise or discrepancy, that's a very different mission than strengthening some conclusion. All right. Like if I'm going to strengthen a conclusion, the author will have told me, this new process will increase profits. So I'm going to go look for something in the answer choices that indicates that this plan will in fact increase profits. My goal is to really like zero in on how the argument is built and to shore it up. So I want to get a sense like, okay, I'm in a strengthen. If I'm in a discrepancy, my job is to really focus in on, okay, well, where is the actual discrepancy and why? Why is this thing a discrepancy? Like, why are we getting something like, why is this result unexpected? So we'll spend more time with this like understanding of discrepancy, but in order to be able to be really effective with critical reasoning, those first 10 seconds, 15 seconds of a question are really essential. I'm going to read the question itself and try to identify what is it, in fact, that I'm being asked to do or will be asked to do once I read this. Our second step is to read and deconstruct the argument. Okay, so we're going to start there. We go to the argument, we deconstruct. And so as we're deconstructing in this space for this explain a discrepancy, what we want to think about is what is the paradox or the discrepancy, right? So your word, however you want to use it, what is that? And then we might even brainstorm a little, why is this a discrepancy? Why is this weird or unexpected? So what would we have expected? Because that's usually where the answer choice is going to come from. Is this, well, we would have expected this, but we saw this. What would resolve it for us? What would clear this up for us? So first thing we're going to do, we're going to read, and all we care about is what is the discrepancy, paradox, and why is this, like, why are we even thinking it's weird? Like, I don't know. So let's try it with a lovely, simple example. Here we have a nice little 2-sentence paragraph. And I want to hear from y'all in the chat window. What's the surprise and why is that surprising? Why is it weird? Why are we like, what? Why are we shocked, surprised? Okay, so the surprise, got some ideas. Keep typing. I want to hear from everybody. Okay, yeah. So what does it normally mean when we raise prices? When we raise prices, it normally means that, as price increases, demand decreases. Now, here's the thing about explain a discrepancy questions. One of 2 things is always going to be true. The discrepancy, the weird paradox, is either going to depend on a relationship that the test expects you to know. So, for example, if costs go up, we would expect profit to go down, right? Or if the prices go up, we would expect demand to go down, right? These are relationships that you're going to business school that the GMAT expects you to know, right? That price and demand work in opposition, or the formula for profit, right? Or like total revenue or total cost, something like that. If it is not going to be based on the understanding of a given well-known relationship, they're going to have to tell you the normal expectation and then tell you, but that didn't happen. And we don't understand why. So there's like two forms of this. One form is it's a surprise, and you're supposed to intuitively understand because it's a well-known relationship that it's breaking, right? Or they're going to tell you up front. Normally, when prices go up, demand goes down, and a restaurant raised its prices significantly. Surprisingly, however, right? So there will be times where they tell you, usually up front, what the expectation would have been. And then we're like, but surprise, that's not what happened. Right? So if they don't tell you what the expectation actually was, and you know you're in a surprising finding or paradox, then it's because that thing is based on a relationship that you're supposed to already know about. Right? So in this case, everybody hit me with it. It's perfect. Price and demand work in opposition. The more expensive things get, the fewer people we would expect to want them. So that's step one, right? Deconstruct our argument. Understand what is the surprise and why is it so surprising. Next, we take a moment, and that moment is to pause and state our goal. So pause is really just an opportunity to say, okay, I know I'm in a discrepancy. What is the correct answer meant to? Right? Like, what is that correct answer meant to do? Here's the way I think of a discrepancy question. I like to imagine that the author of my little paragraph is a terrible researcher. They're just like an idiot. They're just a complete and total idiot. And they didn't collect all the facts. If they had, this result wouldn't be surprising or paradoxical at all. It would seem completely normal. That's what we're supposed to be doing here. For this type of problem, we're not meant to strengthen the paradox. We're not meant to explain one part of it. But what we're supposed to do is explain away the paradox. We're supposed to say, hey, if this researcher had taken this fact into account, this one fact right here, they wouldn't have been so surprised at what they found, right? They would have thought it was fine. They would have thought it was completely normal. So I want y'all to help me. What would be some things that might help explain what we're seeing that would make it seem like it's less weird that a restaurant that raised its prices ended up with more customers than ever? So what might be some things that would come up for you that are like, well, if this was true, then we wouldn't be surprised. This other thing was true, then we wouldn't be surprised. Yes, I love this. So Tess gave me a great one. There's a brand new super famous chef, right? The chef just won the James Beard Award. They won some Michelin star, right? Like, oh my gosh, that would absolutely make this make more sense because they've got some award-winning chef or some award for the restaurant. Of course, they could both raise their prices and see more customers than ever before, right? Those both would make sense. Totally. What else? Nice. So we've made the place fancier, right? We've made it nicer. Something about it beyond just raising prices. Maybe we've made the dining room prettier. The establishment looks less junky. It's actually really gorgeous. Other things we could include in that. Maybe we are investing in new ingredients. We have a better menu. What else? I love these. These are great ideas. Any other ideas that are coming to you? Yes. Okay. That's my favorite. Mary G just gave me my favorite. What if every single other restaurant in town closed? Right? Or what if the street that we're on all of a sudden got famous for whatever? Now we have this like crazy walking, foot traffic or whatever, right? Like all of these are like these are all fantastic examples of things that would explain this discrepancy. Totally. Right. Explain this discrepancy. All right. So, do I need to brainstorm? No, you don't. You don't actually need to brainstorm. I do think it's useful in that pause to think for a moment like, can I imagine something that would make this make sense? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I'm not going to burn up a bunch of time trying to come up with something because I do need to have time to evaluate my answer choices because that is going to be our step 4. Right. So step 4 is this elimination process, wrong to right. You're going to write A, B, C, D, E on your paper. Yes, you are. You're going to always write A, B, C, D so you can mark lines through them. And so we're going to start looking for specific wrong answer types. Right. And there's really common wrong answers in this world of discrepancy. So I'm going to try and eliminate some of those. But if in the process of pausing and stating the goal, I come up with an idea or two, cool, right? That's totally fine. But if, I'm only going to take a moment to consider that, not forever. Yeah. Okay. So let's give this a shot. I want you to try this one on your own. Here are your 5 answer choices. This one's definitely a lot easier than, again, like I said, things that you would get on the real exam. But give this one a go. I'll give you about a minute or so to run through it. I'll give you a little stopwatch to track it for you. And then we'll talk about it on the other side. All right, go ahead and send me your answer. I'd love to see what y'all think it might be. It should seem a little familiar based on our conversation. But you might have found some other tempting answers. Yeah, totally possible that you found some other tempting answers. Nice. All right. So far, everyone who has pulled in is telling me the same thing. They've chosen answer choice C. And you are exactly right. The restaurant was recently rated #1 in the country. If that were true, like this wouldn't be a surprise anymore, right? Like, we wouldn't be like, wow, weird. Why? Question is, what about the other four? All right, great. We found this one. But what's wrong with the other four answers? So I want to hear from y'all. Were there any really tempting or more tempting than the other answer choices? Any of these things that were like, I don't know, that one is a little bit tempting. It's okay if not. Cool. Okay. All right. So let's go through why some of these wrong answers are wrong. Yeah. Yeah. I love this. Okay. So I got a comment about A. That's like the restaurant is on a busy street. That isn't quite tempting, but I think this like really is important that this doesn't highlight a change. This is often what I will call a status quo wrong answer choice. And so, or like for those of you that have done social science or science research, the ceteris paribus, meaning all else equal kind of thing. It's like, yeah, but if the restaurant was on a busy street, it was on a busy street before. So just because they're on a busy street, the street didn't become busy. Right. And so what we need is if you're going to tell me that after this change, something happened, you can't just tell me, well, the restaurant was on a busy street. The same is actually true for answer choice E, right? Okay, upscale American cuisine. Maybe that's expensive, right? Maybe that helps explain like why the restaurant charges a lot of money, but it was an upscale American restaurant before, presumably. It doesn't say that they changed over their menu and became an upscale American restaurant, right? Like it. So status quo means it's not going to highlight why this change happened. The other two are also kind of common wrong answer choices. And I think it sometimes has to do with catching people who misunderstand what it means to help explain, right? So sometimes people will read help explain and they think that their job is to try and explain one or more of the facts, right? And so in this case, this idea of one-sided, like it explained something, would be answer choice D, right? And so I think of this as like it explains something in the argument, just not the finding itself. Like D might explain why the restaurant raised its prices, but it doesn't explain the surprising finding. And our job is to explain the surprising finding. There are also times where I think people misunderstand this surprising finding as like intensify the surprise, right? Or like heighten the surprise. And so they'll look for answer choices or they'll choose an answer choice that actually makes the surprise even more surprising. And so if the restaurant raised its prices and now has even fewer menu choices, no comment about whether they are better or higher quality, that would actually heighten the surprise. Like, okay, so now it's expensive and there are fewer options. Are we sure that's a good idea? Like, how's that going to explain people flocking to our doors? Yeah. So just we're looking for a few of these, common trap wrong answers. But I think more importantly, what I am trying to find is if this thing were true, the surprise wouldn't be surprising anymore. It just wouldn't be surprising. Yeah. All right. We're going to try another whole thing. All right, I'll give you the question text first. This one only has 3 answer choices. So I wanted to kind of cut back. Now that we're dealing with like a more realistic argument, we'll cut down the answer choices. And then next we'll do like a full problem. So where our job is to read the question. Then our job is to deconstruct the argument and then pause, state the goal, process the answer choices. Send me your answer when you think you got it. We'll take about 15 more seconds. All right, if you haven't sent me an answer yet, please do. Okay, so we read the question and we identify. And so, I mean, obviously it's tonight, so you should be expecting them to be discrepancy, but we've got this language of helps to explain why something is happening. So if we're going to be explaining something, that's essentially always explain a discrepancy. So now I'm going to go read and try to understand what the surprise is. And usually there's going to be language like the last one that said surprising. This one says yet or but or however, right? Like these are big words that are going to tell me where we thought one thing was happening, yet but however something else, or surprisingly something else. Mm-hmm. So in our first sentence, this is where they have to tell me an expected relationship. What are they telling me? They're telling me that if you take a low dose of aspirin, it might be good for you in this one way. If you take a low dose of aspirin, it would significantly reduce your risk of having a heart attack or a stroke. Aspirin, good for heart attack, stroke, right? So that's setting up the understanding. Because of the surprise, doctors have stopped recommending daily aspirin for most patients. Wouldn't be surprising if we didn't know that daily aspirin had a benefit. Right? So sentence one, low dose aspirin has a benefit. It significantly reduces your risk of heart attack and stroke. However, surprise, shocker of the century, doctors have stopped recommending that you take a low daily dose. They've stopped. My question is like, why? That's what I want to be thinking about when I think explain is why, if aspirin has this health benefit, would doctors stop recommending it? Right. And I might brainstorm like, well, maybe it's dangerous in other ways, or maybe there's a better treatment, right? That doctors are recommending something else instead that's more effective. Yeah. So that's what we're sort of looking here. We're not going to debate the facts. So in the previous example with the restaurant, we're not going to debate that price and demand work generally in opposition. Like that's not going to be a debate that we have here. We never we never argue with the facts. We take everything as given. What we're trying to figure out is what new piece of information. So we wouldn't have something that shows up and says, a recent study shows that low doses of aspirin are actually not helpful in reducing the risk of heart attack or stroke. Right? They're not going to just all of a sudden negate something that way. So aspirin is good in some cases or for some things, But surprisingly, doctors have stopped actually recommending it for most people. My other recommendation for CR in general is if you ever encounter an answer choice that's confusing, don't fight with it. Move on to the next one, right? This is why we use ABCDE, process of elimination. Because if I see something and I don't know if it's the right one, I'm just going to leave it and go to the next one. I'm only going to like mark something out if I know it's wrong. And I'm only going to read an answer choice once, maybe twice before I move to the next one. Do not eliminate things just because they're confusing. Only eliminate answers because you have confidence that they're wrong. So, what about the fact that only a small percentage of patients have already experienced a heart attack or stroke? That doesn't help me understand why I wouldn't want to prevent heart attacks and stroke from happening. And so, if a low dose of daily aspirin significantly reduces heart attack or stroke, knowing that only a few people have already had one doesn't really help me understand why I would stop trying to prevent more of them. And so we'll take out answer choice A. The second one I think is a little bit harder to make sense of. Patients who are at a low risk for a heart attack, okay, are probably not going to comply with a doctor's recommendation. But this is actually strange because doctors aren't recommending. So this doesn't help me understand. Like, it doesn't seem like doctors are going to stop recommending it just because some people, a small population, would have ignored them anyways. No. So then what does C do here? Aspirin acts as a blood thinner, which can lead to internal bleeding, particularly in the stomach or brain. Oh, well, okay, low doses of aspirin can help in one case, but it would appear that the aspirin can be harmful. And so maybe the reason why doctors have stopped recommending it for most patients is because in the balance, this could be a reason why, well, it's got a negative effect too. So maybe we don't have people take it all the time, right? Again, most patients. And so C helps to explain why doctors might not prescribe aspirin, because while it does have at least a positive benefit we know about, it has at least a negative, right, that we also know about. Okay. All right. How are we feeling with this concept of a discrepancy? 1 being the least comfortable, 5 being the most comfortable, because we're going to get a full example. Cool. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. So I'm going to give you this question as a whole from the start. But again, I'm going to give you a moment with the argument first, the question itself first. And then here you are, your argument, and this time your 5 answer choices. Enjoy. All right. So our standard time for CR is going to be about 2 minutes. I think this is a little trickier, yeah? A little bit harder. Okay, got a few different answers. All right, so which of the following would provide the best explanation? All right, that's our language for evaluate, right? Our best explanation. So now we're going to go up and try and read. Voting records show, however, there's that however, we're going to find it. So in a recent poll, 71% of the people who responded reported that they cast votes. Records show, however, that only 60% of eligible voters actually voted. So let's brainstorm for a moment. This is making it sound like people are liars, which could be an answer to this question, right? That if 71% of, all people say they cast votes, but it turns out that only 60% of people did cast votes, 11% of people were lying, or those votes were lost, or they didn't count, or I don't know, right? So that's one explanation, that there were liars. I do want to take a moment to note that when they're giving me facts, they're giving me evidence, I want to pay really close attention to the language they use. I am a little bit of a lawyer here when we're trying to work on critical reasoning. In this poll, it's 71% of the people who responded to this poll. The 60% would be 60% of all people who were eligible to vote. So unless this recent poll was taken of 100% of people who were eligible voters, then another reason could be that there's some sort of polling issue. Like maybe the group of people we polled isn't the same as the entire population of eligible voters. Maybe it's a smaller subset, and in some way they behave differently. So as we look at this, it's like, wait a minute. In a poll, 71% of those people said they voted, but 60% of a big group actually did. What might be different? So the things I might be looking for are, these people are liars, or maybe there's something wrong with the group that we polled. Maybe it's not representative. Right? It isn't the full 100% of eligible voters. Okay, so I'm going to skip over a couple of the more popular answers, because I personally think that A would stay on my board, right? TBD on if we're going to pick it, but it would certainly stay on my list, because if they're telling me that there is some fluctuation, there's a margin of error, then that means that maybe the poll wasn't accurate. So maybe they aren't liars. Maybe the people weren't liars. The poll is just, there's a margin of error in the polling. Cool. 15%. Okay, we're getting numbers here. 15% of the survey's respondents were living overseas. Sure. But that doesn't explain to me why 11% said they voted but didn't. Because if this poll was of 100% of all people, of all the eligible voters, then 11% are lying to us, or there's some sort of mathematical error that has happened to these 11% of people. So 15%, it's nice, they're giving me numbers, but just because they live overseas, they'd have to tell me that living overseas means that you are more likely, it's extremely likely for people living overseas to have their votes lost. And they'd have to tell me that, like, essentially 70% of those people, like 70% of people living overseas, have votes that get lost in the mail or something like that. And they don't tell me that. They don't give me extra information. People are less likely to respond to a poll the same day they voted. Well, they didn't tell me when any of these people voted. So that's not helpful. And we're talking about the people who did respond, respondents. So people are less likely to respond to a poll on the same day that they vote. Doesn't mean that they don't respond to the poll ever. And so, that's not, it doesn't entirely make sense, right? It's not how it might impact. Some people who intend to vote are prevented from doing so by last minute conflicts or other complications. Okay, this one I like. This one's a little tempting, right? Because it's like, okay, what if this poll was like people who said they were going to vote and then they ended up being prevented from doing so? So it wasn't that this 11% lied, it's that this 11% intended to, but then didn't. Why is this answer wrong? Because that feels convincing. If it was that 71% of people were like, yeah, I'm gonna go vote, and then it turns out that they didn't. What do we know about these people? Yeah, beautiful. Because these 71% of people said that they they voted. These 71% were not saying, I intend to vote. This 71% said, I voted. I voted. And then we don't see your vote there. So we're going to take D out. All right, E. Prior research has shown that people who actually do vote are also more likely to respond to polls than the people who don't vote. This feels wordy, but what is it actually saying? Right? What are they actually telling us with this one? That people who actually do vote are more likely to respond to a poll than people who don't vote. What would we expect, right? What would I expect if somebody said to me, oh, yeah, when people respond to polls, like the people who respond to polls are actually more likely to be voters. Yeah, that's beautiful. Mary says perfect, that the sample wasn't representative. And now we know flat out that E says the sample is not representative. We just need to make sure that its non-representativeness actually matches the data we see. So if here's what I know, according to this, remember, if true, which of the following, if true. So if it is true that people who respond to polls are disproportionately more likely to be voters than the general public, then I would expect that the percent of people in polls who say they voted would be higher than in the normal population, because that poll is made up of more voters than, as a proportion, than the entire voting, eligible voting pool. This isn't just telling me that there is a non-representativeness, but it's explaining that non-representativeness actually does work in the direction of the data I see. So let's go back to A, because E seems to be working. So let's go back to A. The margin of error for the survey was plus or minus 5, but my error is actually 11. And so plus or minus 5 from the 71 wouldn't get me all the way down to the 60, right? The plus or minus 5 would imply that it wasn't 71%, but it was actually 66% or as many as 76%. Right? So it's not enough. So yes, an error might help, but this error wasn't large enough. And so answer choice E explains that, the reason why the sample number didn't match the general population is because the sample is skewed, and it's actually skewed towards voters. So that's why it makes sense that we see a higher percentage of people saying they voted in this study or in this poll than the percent of people who actually, voted in the real population. Okay. How are we feeling with a real question now? 1 to 5, 1 being the least comfortable, 5 being the most. Because we're going to take a look at a couple of variations, but I want to make sure and see how we're doing. Okay. It was hard. Yeah. This one was definitely harder, for sure. Okay. One of, I think, the most misunderstood questions in CR is the complete the passage. The way these will look is that you'll see a sentence at the top, which of the following best completes the passage below, and then you'll get your argument that'll end in a blank. And then you'll get your 5 answer choices. So in order for us to know what we're going to do with this, what we typically want is to take a look at the entire kind of text before that like blank so that we can see like, okay, this is what's being this is what they're actually asking for. Because the fact is the word before that blank isn't always descriptive. So this word says since. However, since would indicate something like a support. So we could imagine that what comes after the blank would support something. I've seen the words because, which is kind of the same word as since, right? So I've got another example of that. That's like, because. But you might even see words like assume, like assuming that blank. So that would be more likely to indicate that the answer choice is an assumption, or it would be concludes that, right? Or inferred that. And so in those types of questions, what comes after that, what's in the blank, would be a conclusion, like where you draw your own conclusion. So I do think it does sometimes blanks can show up as an assumption. They can show up as draw a conclusion. And every so often they can kind of come up as a strengthen. But I think even when it seems like they're a strengthen, it's actually that you're meant to be strengthening some interesting paradox, right? So what I've got is my little, if I kind of read back to the beginning of this sentence, notice what this says. They're going to describe some sort of plan. And everything they're going to say about this plan is going to make it sound like it would work. Right? It's going to be like, oh, this plan's great. This would work. In the same way that it was like, hey, if you take a low dose aspirin, that's good for you. Right? So they're going to explain some sort of plan and why it would be good, why it would work. But then they're going to go, however, it's not going to work. So your job is to say, okay, let's imagine this was what really happened. All of this said it was going to be great, but guess what? It failed. I have to explain this surprise fail. Same thing with like this example language. The long term prospects of the new treatment are not promising, however, because. So, generally, what I look for in a blank is if I see a yet or a however or a but in that sentence leading up to the blank, I'm going to treat this a little bit more like a discrepancy because it's like they're going to feed me with all this information about why this thing is going to work, like why it's going to be great, this prospect or this treatment, this plan, this whatever. Like, here's all the reasons why it should totally work. And then surprisingly, it failed. Surprisingly, it's a mess. And so I'm going to think about that of like, okay, what? Well, okay, what would make it fail? Right? Why might it be a mess? What would be wrong with that? All right, so we're going to give it a try on this example. Here you go. Pull in with your answer when you got it. Okay, we'll take another 10 seconds or so and send me your favorite answer. All right. A little trickier, more complex argument with a more complex expectation of what's going to get spit out. Right? We've got this, we're going to give students, we're going to encourage them, give them this option to buy half price passes for public transportation. And it claims it's going to reduce air pollution while increasing profits for the city's public transportation system. However, this plan is unlikely to meet its goals because. So let's get rid of some answer choices that nobody chose. So, first answer choice that might be nice to eliminate would be B. Most college students in Motor City view public transportation as prohibitively expensive. Okay, good to know because we're about to give you a discount. So that implies that maybe now that we've cut that price in half, it's not prohibitively expensive anymore. And so, if anything, this makes me think that my plan would work. Like, I'm even more surprised that it didn't work. I'm even more like, wait, why is it not going to work? Kids are going to ride this public transportation. Ditto for C. College students typically work, have schedules outside of 9 to 5. And so there's going to be room for them to ride the bus, right? There's room for them. So it might be affordable and they might be able to actually ride it. Like, okay, that's nice. I'm going to leave D. We'll come back to A and D. Those are both really popular answers. E, a large proportion of college students live off campus. Oh, well, that makes this surprising then, because like if there's all these kids that live off campus, they would need public transportation. Right. And so if they need public transportation, maybe my plan would work. Okay. So B, C, and E all sort of increase my surprise. All of these enhance, make me think that this is weirder. So let's look at A and D. What would happen if A was true? If most college students in Motor City saw public transportation as unsafe, what would that mean? Well, it might mean that if I see this thing as unsafe, just because you give me a discount doesn't mean I'm going to ride it. Right? Like, I think it's unsafe. So you can make it free for all I care. The reason I don't ride it is because it's scary. And so that would certainly be a fact that would explain why this plan is likely to fail. Right? Because they're not going to get students to buy these half price monthly passes. Okay, A makes a good argument. What about D? A bus produces more air pollution per mile than does a car. Well, they do say, right? They claim this plan will reduce air pollution in Motor City. And if a bus produces more air pollution per mile than a car does, how's that going to reduce air pollution? But hold on. I don't think this is a one-for-one exchange, right? A bus produces more air pollution per mile than does a car, but I'm trying to get more than just one student to ride the bus at a time. I want a bus to have 20 students on it or 30 or however big a bus is. And so it may be true that a bus produces more air pollution per mile than a car does, but does a bus produce more air pollution than 20 cars? But I have another question for you. Where does it tell us that Motor City has buses? Or did we just assume that? I mean, public transportation often includes buses, but that's not the only type of public transportation that a city has, right? Cities also have light rail, subways, right? And so it may not be city bus. It may be that most transportation is actually, train, light rail, what have you. And so there's a two kind of part whammy for D. We move to a new word like a bus. Well, I don't know. And also, a bus and a car is not the exchange. We're looking for like a bus versus several cars because each bus should have several cars worth of people in it. And so for that reason, we're actually going to eliminate very tempting answer D, and we'll go with what is in fact correct answer A, that what would be a reason why this plan would fail? What would explain that? If nobody took us up on our deal, if people just didn't engage with the plan at all. Okay. Definitely getting harder. All right, we're going to do one more. All right, so this last one we're going to do is an accept question. So all of the following, if true, help to explain something, the increase in traffic accidents caused by deers, except for one of them. So in an accept question, I'm actually not using I'm not looking for the right answer. I'm still trying to eliminate four answers. This time, however, I want to find four answers that all do in fact help to explain. So four of these answer choices will explain the increase in traffic accidents caused by deer. One of them just won't, right? It'll either do the opposite, it'll explain something else, who knows? But I'm looking for the four answer choices that do. So this will give us a little bit more practice in finding kind of things that explain. Definitely some longer answer choices. So take your time on this one and pull in when you think you've got it. Take another 15 seconds or so. All right. So we're told that the government had a plan. They were going to lengthen this like hunting season, theoretically, in hope of hunters being able to, get more deer in order to reduce the number, right? To kill off some of these deer. And therefore decrease the number of accidents that are caused by deer, automobile accidents that are caused by deer. Surprisingly, however, it didn't work. There have actually been more accidents due to deer than fewer, substantially more, since the introduction of this plan. So back to this idea of like, we raise prices. The government thought that lengthening the deer season would mean hunters could kill more deer, reducing their number and decreasing the number of automobile accidents. And turns out the exact opposite happened. Why? I might have some ideas, but I'm going to go into the answer choices and start to take a look. So answer choice A, the presence of humans, that would be hunting, in the woods causes the deer to move to new places. So they're like running from them, which clearly makes sense, which causes the deer to cross roads more frequently than normal. Yep, that would certainly explain, because if they're crossing roads more frequently than normal, they're more likely to be hit by vehicles. So yep, that would explain this discrepancy. So I eliminate it. Where they live, this longer hunting season has attracted more hunters, greater amount of traffic than usual. So, okay, one, it could be more deer in the road. That's A. B, it could be more cars. And so if there are either of those things, more deer or more cars, this plan's not going to work. So B's coming out as well. Most accidents involving deer, well, they tell us how they happen. Car swerves, they leave the deer fine, but then they wreck the car. I don't know how that tells me that there would be more or fewer accidents, so I'm going to leave it. D, deer tend to run, bolt, when they hear gunshots from a hunter, for example, or other loud sounds, people in the woods, and are more likely to run across a road without kind of warning or noticing or, okay, yep, that would make sense. That we are now getting more deer willing to run across the road because they're scared. And then E, a new highway was recently built that increased the traffic, and it went straight through this primary habitat of the deer population. And so now there's just more opportunity for deer and vehicles to mix. And so we would result in more accidents, automobile accidents. And so the only answer choice that doesn't explain the increase in traffic, it does explain something. It explains how these automobile accidents happen, but it doesn't explain the surprising finding. And so our correct answer choice C. Okay. Thanks for sticking around a little bit longer, guys. So a reminder, what we're looking for are kind of the words of explain. We are looking for things like paradox or surprise, explanation, right? Those are the words that would signal we're dealing with and explain a discrepancy problem. Once we know, our job is then to deconstruct the argument, focusing really on like, what is the surprise? What would we have expected? Like, why is this weird? And then my pause and state the goal. This just must be an idiot who did this, who wrote this article is an idiot. He didn't actually collect all the facts. He didn't talk to everybody. He's like mixing up words. This person wouldn't be so surprised if they'd done better research. So our job is to explain away the surprise. I want to come up with something that's like, oh, well, then this isn't surprising then. This is obvious, right? We're not just going to explain something. We're going to explain that. We're going to explain to this terrible researcher how their surprising result isn't actually all that surprising. Well, if you've enjoyed our free prep hours, come hang out with us. We've got lots and lots and lots of free study resources. You can find them all on our website. You can also attend session 1 of any of our full 9-week courses. Come try us out, see what it's like, meet some of our different instructors. We'd love to see you. And then please come and sign up for more free prep hours. We have a couple a month. We'll see you. We've got some more coming up, I think in December, and we definitely will have lots in the new year. And so for those of you, if I get to see you before the new year, amazing. If not, happy end of 2024. Here's to 2025, and hoping that that year and your studies and all of your application goals go beautifully. It was a pleasure to get to spend the evening with y'all. Have an amazing night.